U.S. Week has been covering little else besides the nationwide anti-war protests over the last 7 days. With the 11th anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and the danger of new and wider wars in the Middle East and North Africa on the rise, Chicago waded in with End the Afghanistan War Now, No War and Sanctions on Iran, and a protest march. Portland celebrated their first anniversary with an anti-war rally and food donations for the homeless. LA occupiers also showed their pedigree when they came out against imperialist wars and U.S. drone attacks abroad. And we have a report on occupiers' efforts to offer families foreclosure protection. This is, of course, when they are not out on their streets protesting. Hey, hey, ho, ho, killer drones have got to go. Occupy Wall Street has, from its inception, been primarily focused on social and economic justice and how best to go about identifying issues facing the 99%, not only in the U.S. but overseas. Civil rights and liberties are under attack, with national security used as an excuse to spy on the people and infiltrate activist groups. Muslims, people of Middle Eastern heritage, and minority groups are prime targets. Tens of millions are unemployed due to the crisis of capitalism run amok, with social programs slashed and public sector layoffs. Corporate media blames workers for the crisis, but the real cause is clear: a U.S. military budget and costly wars to the tune of trillions of dollars, more than all other countries on Earth combined. Occupy joined forces in the streets with veteran and active duty military groups in several U.S. cities the weekend of October 6th and 7th to loudly proclaim there can be no social and economic justice anywhere as long as parasites of war control the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. The weekend was chosen because it marked the 11th anniversary of the U.S. NATO invasion and never-ending occupation of Afghanistan. Military and civilian protesters took the streets and parks and put a mic to several reality checks. Death tolls mounting in Afghanistan and Pakistan, increased use of killer drones, the occupation of Palestine, and crippling Western sanctions, covert and overt aggression against several sovereign nations. The danger of new and wider wars in the Middle East is ever present. Veteran activists claim, with substantial affirmative evidence, that the U.S. and its allies are arming, funding, and training opposition forces in Syria. Massive U.S. air and naval forces are deployed in the Persian Gulf, and leaders in Washington and Israel threaten Iran with an all-out attack, not ruling out use of nuclear weapons. Vicious sanctions, which inflict maximum suffering on the Iranian people, have been implemented and escalated. In Palestine, Israel illegally seizes more Palestinian land and violently suppresses Palestinians on a daily basis. Corporate media constantly regurgitates governmental propaganda and colludes with secular and religious ministries to promote war, divisions, and nationalism, while allowing a ruling worldwide elite to impose more austerity on long-suffering human beings. Massive civil uprising is ongoing in dozens of Western nations. Instead of diverting money to job development, clean energy, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and addressing social issues such as hunger and homelessness, the elites and their puppet governments build more weapons of mass destruction, play more games of war, and enrich themselves at the expense of humanity. The world is looking to the people of the United States to awaken from their indoctrinated stupor and stop the unrelenting onslaught. Yet Americans who still have something to lose are hung up on entertainment, partisanship, and clinging to illusions of privilege and exceptionalism. Occupy and its allies seem to represent the only beacons of light and truth. Despite the immense efforts of authoritarian states to stop them, these brave souls keep on shining. Occupy Los Angeles rallied with dozens of anti-war groups at Hollywood and Highland for a march against imperialism, colonialism, war, drones, and the military-industrial complex. The march's destination was a military recruitment center, and veterans spoke out at every opportunity about the need to choke off the supply of fresh recruits by educating youth as to harsh realities of war for profit and multiple combat deployments. A call to conscience was also issued to active duty troops to stand down and refuse to participate in illegal invasion and occupation with full support of brothers in arms who have been there and done that. Activists in Portland rallied the same weekend to mark the anniversaries of Occupy Portland and the 2001 Afghan invasion. Occupy Portland, not Afghanistan, featured marches and teach-ins to revive collaborative efforts and to connect economic justice and peace issues. Occupiers, veteran, and community groups met at Szymanski Park on Saturday and PCC Cascade on Sunday. Themes were money for jobs, education, healthcare, housing, and the environment, not war. End the wars and occupations, no nukes, no drones. Restore constitutional rights, and Main Street, not Wall Street, with power to the people. The event held a special sense of urgency with the recent announcement that Oregon's National Guard will send a huge deployment to Afghanistan in 2014, as well as the release of a recent study showing drone strikes actually increase violent reactions in the affected populations instead of quelling them. Non-perishable food donations were also made by attendees to benefit Right to Dream 2 and Sisters of the Road. Occupy Portland, as ever, keeping the homeless and disadvantaged in their hearts and offering tangible support. Occupy Chicago also joined in solidarity with Answer Coalition and other veteran and peace activists for a rally on October 7th to end the Afghanistan war now.
Sure, I'm one of the people that had his home raided on September 24th, 2010, almost 2 years ago. 14 of us were subpoenaed to a grand jury that day. 9 others were subpoenaed in December on an investigation of people allegedly providing material support for terrorist organizations. Essentially what they're trying to say is that our political support of the people in Palestine, the people in Colombia, their right to defend themselves against Israel and the Colombian government, both which are supported unequivocally by the United States government and U.S. policy. They're trying to say that that is illegal. Our political speech is illegal. Our anti-war work is illegal. Our international solidarity work is illegal. And we reject that, we resist it, and one of the ways we've manifested that resistance is by refusing to testify at the grand jury. All of us who are targeted by this investigation have been protesting the Afghan war since day one. We protest all wars perpetrated by the United States, all of the policies of the empire that are trying to take advantage of the resources of people throughout the world. We protest the policies in the United States, austerity policies, the policies of the poor being taken advantage by the rich, especially in this economic recession. And because we're anti-war activists, and because we protest the Afghan war, and because we all protested the Republican National Convention in 2008, that's the reason why we're being attacked and we're being investigated. So it's all about our political work, whether it's international solidarity work in support of Palestinians and Colombians, or the war in Afghanistan and Iraq and the Philippines. Those things we are protesting, and that's why we're being investigated.
Calling for no war and sanctions on Iran and an end to Western intervention in Syria, protesters gathered in front of the Tribune Tower on North Michigan Avenue to listen to speakers from the United States, Palestine, and Pakistan condemn 11 years of war on Afghanistan.
America is competing with the rising nations for investment, for market share, for natural resources. And if we like to have that, we'll have to compete and learn from other nations. Those nations are not bombing others. They are working out with other people. And that's what we need to take our country towards. War, terrorism, and hate is destroying our country because it is making us unwelcoming people. So you can't bomb people and expect a good relationship with them, which is needed for our economy.
Ranging from college students to retirees, protesters carried signs, chanted, and listened to a series of speakers before heading down Michigan Avenue to proceed to the re-election headquarters of President Obama, where they were met by a line of police bicycles.
This is the 11th anniversary of the illegal and unjust U.S. aggression against Afghanistan. An illegal and unjust occupation that continues until this day, with President Obama increasing the number of troops with a surge, promising to bring the troops home someday, sometime. Why not now? It's illegal and unjust. Bring the troops home now. President Obama, meanwhile, has sent in drones into Pakistan, invaded Libya, bombed the hell out of Libya, and is now threatening to do the same thing with Syria and Iran. That's why we're here today, among other reasons. I'm with the March 19th Anti-War Coalition. We oppose the U.S. wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the threats of war, the interference, the sanctions, the assassinations of people sponsored by the U.S. and its allies in Iran and Syria.
Why March 19th? Why is it named that?
March 19th came up on the anniversaries of the U.S. illegal and unjust bombings of Iraq.
Marchers then headed west across the river for a stop at Boeing's world headquarters, where they were again barred by police, although no moves were made to get inside. Over in New York City, a peace and memorial vigil was held by anti-war veterans and activists at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Plaza to demand an end to the 11-year war in Afghanistan, to demand an end to all U.S. wars of aggression, to remember all those killed and wounded by war, and to stand up for the right and, more emphatically, duty to assemble and organize. All of the fallen from the Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan wars, as well as less publicized actions, were remembered. Included in the fallen were civilians, veteran suicides, and those who have been maimed by war. War veterans and supporters stood vigil, reading the names of their dead comrades in arms. The New York Police Department warned them of the recently imposed closing time at the plaza, yet the veterans remained in place, keeping their oath to the Constitution and reciting a litany of the human cost of war. One would think NYPD would respect this peaceful vigil and allow the memorial to continue. Instead, police arrested dozens of attendees and targeted live-stream journalists filming the event. Oddly enough, in a nation where "Support the Troops" rings from every bellicose loudspeaker, mainstream corporate media had not, a day later, bothered to report on NYPD's temerity, lack of respect, and utter non-support for U.S. war veterans. Veterans and their allies from Occupy and peace groups who attended anti-Afghanistan war actions in Washington, D.C. and New York City were honored and touched to meet an active-duty soldier who took a public stand against the war. At 24 years old, the young sergeant is a veteran of 4 combat tours, 1 in Iraq and 3 in Afghanistan. He has been active in the Occupy movement from Wall Street in NYC to K Street in Washington, D.C. He has been absent without leave from the military for over a month, and he chose the anniversary of the Afghan invasion to reveal his whereabouts, speaking out and bearing witness to the horrors of endless war and occupation.
Today is a very special day for me. It marks 1 month and 1 day that I left my unit. I am an active duty sergeant. My name is Micah Turner. I was in psychological operations for 5 years, making propaganda and just trying to do what I thought was right. But now I feel that it is my duty to dissent. And now that I am 1 month and 1 day away from my unit, I am officially a deserter of the United States Army. Right now, all over the country, my face is being passed from one person to another. My information is being passed from one person to another. Soon, I will turn myself into the United States military, peacefully, but not quietly.
The sergeant faces arrest and serious charges for his conscientious actions. Yet he is a hero to many and joins Private Bradley Manning, along with hundreds of other active-duty U.S. military who have decided that an end to war begins with the individual. Several Occupy groups in Orange County, California continue their foreclosure protection efforts on behalf of the Perez family, and OWS Week caught up with members of the family to hear the latest on their ongoing foreclosure nightmare. One missed payment due to a medical crisis led to a tangle of failed negotiations and constant harassment from their mortgage holder and authorities.
From the beginning, 4 years ago, we had an emergency. We had to go to Mexico. My grandfather was very ill. And when we came back, we were 1 month late on our house payment. My mom tried to send the payment to the bank. The bank returned the payment stating, "We are not your bank anymore. Your bank is so-and-so." So she tried to send the month payment to that bank. That bank returned the payment saying, "It's not 1 month payment, it's 2 months payment." So my mom sent 2 months payment and they sent that back saying, "It's not 2 months, it's 3 months." So my mom said, "Hey, why don't you take these 2 months and then I'll send you $500 or $600 every month, including the monthly payment, till I make up this month that I didn't pay, but please let me pay you, let's work something out." And the bank, of course, wouldn't work with her, wouldn't negotiate anything. So my mom was, I guess, kind of backed up into a corner, forced to look for all these people who defrauded us, took our money in various different ways. They took more than $40,000 from her.
The family has gone public with Occupy and community groups' assistance, not just to hold on to their home of 24 years, but to shine light on the hundreds of families facing the same illegal foreclosures and evictions in their county, not to mention millions of families across the United States.
We know we're being evicted. We didn't really know till the sheriff showed up telling us, "You have a week to move out," that we were gonna get evicted. That's when all my siblings, found out about all this foreclosure stuff that my mom had been fighting by herself.
The rulers have always used publicity to justify war in order to spend on murder instead of welfare. However, in the past, they would go to extraordinary lengths to convince society that they were waging just wars, for greater good, so to speak. But after Colin Powell's performance at the UN Security Council prior to the Iraq War, and the international community's refusal to be taken in, it became clear that the new breed of rulers did not consider it necessary to convince anyone beforehand in order to bring death, misery, and poverty to the doorsteps of the human family, and this included for the first time their own public. Reports of serious financial irregularities came early on during the U.S.-led occupation of Iraq. American private security and supply companies were found to be overcharging the U.S. government to the tune of billions, as well as putting servicemen and women's lives at risk to literally make a killing.
Police unit, basically our whole mission was to secure profit for private contractors, specifically in my case Brown and Root, which is part of Halliburton, which then Vice President Dick Cheney used to be the CEO of. So we were basically putting our lives on the line, coming into conflict with Iraqis on a daily basis in order to secure these convoys going from base to base a lot of times running empty trucks, just because the more trucks on the road the company had, the more profit they could make.
But a dazed and confused U.S. public, recovering from the 9/11 incidents, seemed frozen with shock or unwilling to act on reports by indie journalists about the sheer human cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or even the damage that was being done to the U.S. economy. With the inevitable arrival of flag-draped coffins by the plane load back to the U.S., and the scramble to assist tens of thousands of injured or maimed troops, the biggest fraud yet in the world's banking history proceeded largely unnoticed and unchallenged. But by 2005, dissenting voices from all sections of the U.S. society began to be heard. George W. Bush's administration had begun diverting all available public money to the wars abroad. Education, medical care, Social Security, and infrastructural projects had all been put on hold or drained of money to keep the wars going in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. In mid-2006, a highly conservative estimate put the cost of the wars to the U.S. at over $1 trillion, while economists in the know argued that the true cost should be put at $3 trillion, because the capital spent on war no longer existed to invest in the intended social and infrastructural projects. Oil prices had meanwhile also peaked from a $25 to $35 range in 2000 to over $110. The upward trend continued to $147 a barrel and held above $120 for almost a year. For Wall Street, operating without much regulation to start with, this was a free-for-all that it could not resist. The toxic assets fiasco arrived by way of fraudulent practices of Wall Street banks, and millions of Americans lost their homes, jobs, and future prospects in the aftermath known to the 99ers as the financial meltdown. Among the chaos, however, one would imagine that those who performed their duties for what they thought was their country's safety and security would receive a fair treatment back home in America. No such prospects have been provided for the tens of thousands of returning servicemen and women. The returning veterans have met the same symptoms that in their absence blighted the U.S. public.
My dad is decorated. He was in the Air Force for 20 plus years, and he just retired a couple of years ago, and his paycheck, his pension, they've dropped it down to I think $400 a month. What do you do with $100 a week? What do you do with that? So he feels jaded. He feels taken advantage of.
Toxic health insurance, mortgages, and miserly retirement pensions have resulted in armies of veterans stricken down with physical and mental disabilities resulting from war, ending their days in squalor on the streets of a country they once faithfully served.